My name is Neftali Danier, Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Baruch College. On behalf of my colleague, Alexandria Jackson, the Office of Alumni Relations, and the Robert C. Weaver Society Black Alumni Network, we welcome you to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion panel discussion, where we will discuss how to build a DEI strategy. Before we begin our program this evening, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself on mute during the program, and if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will address them during the Q&A session. I want to thank you in advance for your cooperation. Now let us begin. I will now introduce our moderator, who will take over the program after introducing her. Our moderator for this evening is Dr. Shelly Everson. Dr. Everson is a professor and intern chair of the Black and Latinx Studies Department at Baruch College, where she teaches literature, feminism, and Black studies. She is also faculty co-director of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation's Transformative Learning in the Humanities Initiative at CUNY. She was most recently academic director of CUNY's Faculty Fellowship Publication Program and is founder of EqualityArchive.com. She is the author of The Real Negro, The Question of Authenticity in the 20th Century African American Literature, as well as several essays on literature, race, and culture. She is currently revising a new book titled The Practice of Blackness: Cold War Surveillance, Censorship, and African American Literary Survival. She earned her undergraduate degree at Columbia University and her graduate degrees at Johns Hopkins University. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Professor Shelly Everson.
Thank you, Neftali, and thank you, Alexandria, and thank you, Robert C. Weaver, alumni and faculty and friends. I see some familiar faces and names in the audience. Thank you very much for supporting this event and recognizing the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just at Baruch, but everywhere. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists. First is Jennifer Tajeda, who earned her MPA in 2015. She is the Manager of Diversity Inclusion at Fred Frank. Jennifer is committed to creating workplaces where everyone has equal access to opportunities so they can thrive and reach their full potential. Prior to joining Fried Frank, Jennifer worked in the public sector in HR and DEI roles. Jennifer holds a bachelor's degree in international relations and economics from Connecticut College, and of course, her fabulous MPA from Baruch. Elliot Dawes, our next panelist, is the Executive Chief Diversity Officer here at Baruch. He was appointed Executive Chief Diversity Officer in last August, 2021. From 2016 to 2021, he was the Chief Diversity Officer for Institutional Equity and Inclusion at SUNY Empire State College. Prior to that, Dawes served as the University Director of the City University of New York's Black Male Initiative and was Assistant Dean for Multicultural Affairs at Hofstra University School of Law. He has experience as a lawyer and educator, including as a trial attorney, Educational Opportunities Litigation Section, Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice, and as an Associate Professor of African American Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Dawes holds an LLM from Columbia Law School, a BA in Government and Africana Studies from Cornell, and a JD from New York University School of Law. Last but not least, we have the incredible Nancy Harvey. She graduated in 1993. She is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at New York Power Authority. She's also an attorney. Nancy Harvey is New York Power Authority's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. In 2020, Nancy was tapped to lead implementation of an aggressive new action plan to ignite and rejuvenate diversity, equity, and inclusion within the New York Power Authority, aimed at moving the largest state public power organization in the nation forward to a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce. She is responsible for designing and implementing the overall diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that align with NYPA's overall business strategy. And she will provide leadership, and she does provide leadership and strategic direction in creating and supporting an environment at NYPA that is inclusive, respectful, and free from discrimination, intolerance, harassment, and retaliation. In this moment, before we begin the panelists, we're going to launch a quick and anonymous poll about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You will see that link in the chat or right on your screen, and you are welcome to just click the boxes and then finally click submit. This will just kind of help us make sure that everyone has a chance to engage and we can get a sense of where everyone is. It's a great way for us to be able to see what we have in common and what we might diverge on that might actually create a lively conversation later. The panel will run like this. Each panelist will speak for 5 minutes, responding to 2 particular questions. Then we will relaunch the poll for those who arrive late. Then the panelists will speak 5 more minutes, responding to another question, and then we'll open the conversation for everyone to discuss. So beginning with the first 2 questions for our panelists. What are the DEI goals and priorities in your professions? And importantly, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean in your professional contexts? We'll start with Ms. Tajeda.
Thank you so much, Professor. So I'm Jennifer Tajeda, and I'm currently the manager of diversity and inclusion at Fried Frank, which is an international law firm. I actually joined the firm in April of 2021, and I quickly hit the ground running as there were many different projects and initiatives that were waiting for my arrival. Fried Frank has 4 full-time dedicated DEI practitioners, of which I'm one, and we work very closely with the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Council. The topic for today is about diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So that's definitely a key component of our strategy at Fried Frank. And we also work very closely with the firm's 4 employee resource groups. We have a mission of increasing the workforce diversity of the firm and to strengthen a culture of inclusion and belonging where attorneys and business services professionals have equal access to opportunities so that they can thrive and reach their full potential. And we have adopted a long-term diversity and inclusion strategy that is built around 4 key pillars. The first one is around partner engagement and accountability. It's really important to ensure that you have the commitment and support from the very top of the organization to achieve diversity and inclusion goals. But one of the things that I always say when I meet with anyone, including all new hires that join the firm, is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the responsibility of every single person that works at the firm. We each play a role at helping create a culture of inclusion and belonging. So whether you are an intern, a summer associate, or a partner, you each play a role. I always say too that there are 4 of us. We can't be everywhere at once, so we really count on everyone to help us execute upon our goals and mission. The second pillar is around building inclusion skills among business services professionals and attorneys. I always say that we're all on our own diversity and inclusion learning journeys. It's really important that we all learn and continue to educate ourselves so that we can continue having important conversations in the workplace. And then our third objective is around embedding diversity and inclusion into policies, processes, and systems. We really are trying to embed DEI into the very fabric of the firm and how we work each and every day. And then our fourth objective is around elevating the 4 employee resource groups that we have at the firm. One of the key things that I work on as the manager of DEI at Fried Frank is that I manage the 4 ERGs. As you can imagine, our professionals are all very busy, but the individuals that have taken on a leadership role within the ERGs are committed to helping us advance DEI, and I really enjoy working with our ERGs. And then I wanted to give you some content into diversity, equity, and inclusion in the legal profession. So despite an increased emphasis on DEI within the legal field for many, many decades, the legal profession remains one of the least diverse professions in the United States. I think, as all of you know, that organizations have greatly accelerated their diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda since the summer of 2020. And we're working towards making progress, but as again, all of you know, change is slow. So one of the key things that I think organizations, including ours, is really looking at is pipeline programs. It's really important that we work with law schools, but even begin earlier than that. There are many programs that work with middle school students, high school students that are interested in legal professions. Those programs are near and dear to my heart. You know, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, so whenever we have an opportunity to partner with a high school or a middle school, I'm really excited for those programs. So in terms of DEI strategies and what it means for the profession, one of the things that I always also think about is that it's not one size fits all. It's really important for organizations to create and mold their diversity and inclusion strategy specifically for that organization. But again, in a key component to the work that we've done, I wanted to highlight pipeline programs. And again, since the summer of 2020, I think that I have seen a greater emphasis on allyship, and that all individuals within organizations, including ours, are very much committed and working to helping achieve real sustainable change. And again, wrapping up this question for me, this is a passion of mine. I've been passionate about DEI forever. So I'm very happy that I get to work in this profession each and every day. I'm learning something new. I feel like I'm making a difference. So I'm very excited to be a part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion team at Fried Frank and helping advance our agenda. So again, very happy to be a part of this panel and hearing from the other esteemed panelists and engaging in a great conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tajeda. And I stand corrected, Fried Frank.
That's
funny.
Professor.
I'm sure you probably see here that fried Frank. Please
Yes.
apologize. Fried Fried Frank. And now we will Fried Frank. Yes. Great. And thank you for that. And now Elliot Dawes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elliot Dawes. I'm the college's Executive Chief Diversity Officer. I'd like to thank the Office of Alumni Relations and Volunteer Engagement for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. And I look forward to talking with and meeting many members of the Robert Weaver Alumni Group. I would like to start off just by focusing on something that Ms. Tajeda said about implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in organizations. And one of the things that she said, I think that is something that we often struggle with as diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, is making sure that we have the support of the leaders of the institution. So it's much easier to implement a diversity, equity, and inclusion program or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives when you have the support of the people who are at the top of the institution, right? So I've been very grateful that I'm working in an environment where our president, David Wu, has been very supportive of focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion at Baruch College. The Chief Diversity Officer, myself at this institution, I'm a member of the President's Cabinet. That often is not the case at many colleges and universities. The Chief Diversity Officer sometimes doesn't report directly to the President. So I've been very grateful that I report directly to the President. I serve on the President's Cabinet, and these diversity, equity, and inclusion issues are discussed as part of our Baruch College business. So I'd like to just take a moment and let everyone know that at the beginning of the 2021-2022 academic year, President Wu launched 6 college-focused goals for the institution. Those 6 college-focused goals can be found on the Brewer College website. So, I'm not going to go through all 6, but so you can go to the website and take a look at all 6 of them. But I am going to focus on college-focused goal number 1 for this academic year. And college-focused goal number 1 is to launch a multifaceted institutional transformation to elevate and enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And several members of the cabinet, including the provost, the vice president of enrollment management, the vice president of student affairs, have been assigned to work with me to work on this particular college-focused goal. And I think it's very interesting that President Wu decided to make enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion college-focused goal number 1. I'm not saying that the other college-focused goals are not important, but this one is featured prominently as the first college-focused goal for the institution during the current academic year. So there are 4 sub-goals that are related to college-focused goal number 1. One is to strengthen the leadership role of the Office of Diversity, Compliance, and Equity Initiatives. That is the DEI office at Brewer College. There has been some turnover in the staffing for the Office of Diversity, Compliance, and Equity Initiatives. I think that the president has really created a plan to create some stability by hiring a new executive chief diversity officer, and also taking steps to make sure that there are 3 full-time employees who work in this office. And those 2 employees have recently been given promotions so that we don't have part-time employees. We're going to have 3 full-time employees working as on our Title IX matters, as well as our human resources matters. Another sub-goal under college-focused goal number 1 is to assess and strengthen our campus culture of respect, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So one of the strategies that we're engaging in at present is to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development is available to various members of our Brewer College community, starting from the top down. So the cabinet members are shortly going to go through diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development, focusing on equity and issues of implicit bias. We've engaged an external consultant who's going to come in and work with cabinet members on these issues, because we need to make sure that we are educating ourselves, and we want to make sure that we're also featuring diversity, equity, and inclusion as, in particular, equity, that we're featuring it prominently in our decision-making processes. We also want to make sure that we're thinking about issues of implicit bias and preventing, by raising consciousness around implicit bias, that we're preventing issues of bias from impacting our decision-making. So again, this is coming from the top down. Our external consultant will also be working with other constituencies at the college, senior managers and administrators, academic department chairs, other people at the college to work on these diversity, equity, and inclusion issues.
I'm going to. Guess what, Elliot?
Yes.
5 minutes goes quickly.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry.
I'm really excited about this conversation, especially when we're talking about the top down, sort of trickle down effect, and also the training, because a lot of times the executive leadership are the ones who are, well, all the time, right? They are the ones who are keeping the gates. I'm going to invite Nancy. I just lost my notes. Nancy Harvey, her 5 minutes. What are her DEI goals at New York Power Authority, and what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean in the context of your work?
Right. Thank you, Shelly, and good evening to everyone who's joined us. Thank you for showing up to listen to what we have to share today and get in this important conversation. I'm Nancy Harvey, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the New York Power Authority, as Shelly said. I've been in this role now just over a year. So I started as Director of DEI, Office of Civil Rights and Inclusion. I've been 7 years in this role, and it got elevated and strengthened, to Elliot's point, as part of our acceleration of the DEI program. Time is really flying in 2020. It feels like yesterday. So at the New York Power Authority, we're in the energy industry, and like law, energy industry is lagging behind in diversity across all levels of management, right? The representation for us is at benchmark, but benchmark is way below, the nation. So for us, we are committed to developing and maintaining a workforce that represents the communities where we live and work. And the New York Power Authority has power projects up in Niagara, going east to St. Lawrence, and down in Astoria, Queens, right? Last year, we created our 10-point diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, becoming the first public energy organization in the nation to establish a comprehensive action plan to increase DE&I across our entire operations. Prior to the George Floyd murder, we did have 40 years of working on DEI. It was not strategically placed except for supply diversity. And I came in and saw this when I joined NYPA and thought, look, we have all these strategies and plans in place because we're very, very innovative and ambitious. And I thought DEI should be explicitly mapped out, called out, and giving directives from leadership all the way down through to the lowest levels of our company. People should be able to see it and understand what that means, right? So working together in partnership with everyone in our community, we have made progress on our plan. Our DEI plan is now one of the 5 foundational pillars of our Vision 2030 strategy. So that I believe it's really ambitious, but also sustainable, right? It's been 2 years out and people are worried about whether or not we're going to be able to maintain the momentum that we started. But at NYPA, we're committed to doing just that and seeing the changes that we want to, that we're aspiring to. So our plan focuses in 3 areas: our staff, our suppliers, and our communities. And the work takes many forms, right? We listen to our employees. We had many listening sessions hosted by our employee resource group. We work closely. We have 6, right, to gain valuable feedback from them, which informed our strategy, our policies, and our training. We've delivered training sessions about mitigating bias, about nurturing a culture of empathy and inclusion. And we've embedded the DEI training into our management, special management trainings that we have. It's meant to help leaders influence change. We want them to be able to create alignment on our vision and our values and to build individual talent. And we've invested thousands of learning hours for developmental experiences, including mentorship, leadership development, our MBA program, and team building event. So I want to touch on the commitments that we made in being able to deliver on our DEI plan. Out of the murder, we accelerated our commitments, right? And what we wanted to do was identify commitments that would help us to grow in listening to the employees, and then our plans worked from those high aspirations. So we committed to building and maintaining an inclusive, racially equitable culture, right? One that prioritizes humanity. So we revisited our values and we actually put them into words and identified DEI as one of our values. We wanted to increase accountability and transparency around our processes. We wanted everybody to understand if you have a complaint or a conflict, is it being handled equitably? Is it even being handled, right? We wanted to make sure people understood how to access jobs and career development and advancement. So we worked on we're working on redoing job descriptions, for instance. And then we're also working on a career pathing project that would help everybody across the organization get the same information at the same time with the same expectations. We even started doing releasing more information. So last year we had our first ESG report, we delivered our first DEI journey report, and we released an infographic about our representation and the metrics that we have been identifying for us to measure against progress. Investment in our office and resources, very important. So of course, my office, I went from one person, I think, to getting approval to hire 3 other full-time employees to work with me. And that was working alongside in a truly collaborative manner with other business units, our environmental justice group, our supply diversity group, and most importantly, the many groups in HR, talent development, knowledge management, recruiting, executive office, and our ERGs, because we continue to work with them. Investing in our Black employees, and that has scaled up, right? We started with where we saw the need most, and we're scaling it further. So we developed a Pathways program. It's first for us, and it was open to our employees of color, individual contributors, so that they could come in and get mentorship and get some other professional developments. And I should touch on our supply diversity. I'm wrapping it up. So there's supply diversity because we want to invest in our community and build capacity for our MWBE vendors. And we also have an environmental justice program that goes into the communities and works with our children, because we believe the pipeline, we need to start at an earlier phase than just looking for adults or college students. So we are working on introducing STEM to underserved and underprivileged kids in our neighbors. So that's what our commitment looks like in the energy industry. And I think it's a lot of work, but we're here for it and we're committed and excited. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy Harvey, Your Power Authority. We have a poll for those of you who came in late. We have a poll. We just wanted to kind of just give you an opportunity to just kind of click the poll if you haven't already, and then you'll see the submit button in the lower right-hand corner. Please complete the poll. It's anonymous, and so we won't know who you are once you complete the poll, but it's a great way for us to kind of get a sense of what we might have in common in this conversation. Please also begin to put your questions in the chat. I see some questions already here, and we're keeping track of them, and we will open up the conversation to questions very soon. Everyone on the panel is really going to now take 2 minutes so we can keep in time, right? Take 2 minutes. If you can help us see or explain how you see equity in particular. I think everyone in this room understands and agrees that diversity, that is racially diverse workforces, student populations, are important. The question about equity seems a little bit more complex, and especially now that we've just experienced 2 years of a pandemic. Can you say something about how you see opportunities and challenges in this and post current and after, hopefully we soon get past this pandemic? How does that inform your work in diversity, especially in equity and in inclusion?
Shall I start? 2 minutes? So equity is a challenge, right? Everybody is differently situated. Everybody has some amount of privilege, but it's relative. And so in the post-pandemic period where it's now hybrid, it's very important for, I feel like, people leaders to understand the challenge and be open to understanding challenges that face their teams. And they have to be able to meet each person where they are, right? It's a difficult, people think it's just simple. For me, they're operations folks who work 24/7 and have to be in the job, on the job to keep the power on, obviously, right? Then there are the professionals who are like me, who chose not to, for multiple reasons, Probably couldn't be a project manager, I'm just saying. Studied law, but my choice is to work how I work. And so there's a balancing act that needs to happen, right? Is it equitable for me to stay remote or even 2 days a week while somebody else is working 7 days a week? How am I treating the folks who are actually remote? Are they getting as much attention as someone else, right? Are they being taken seriously because of the distance bias? So I do think equity is going to be a challenge, understanding what the bias is that can show up that we all have, right? How that shows up and how we manage it is going to be critical to how we move forward in a hybrid workforce, because you can see some people, you can't see others, and we have this distance bias thing working. And I will say for some people, working remote is a privilege. For others, it's critical. They can't function without that space, right? You're reducing bias, you're reducing microaggressions, and you may do your best work that way. And then I feel for like students or people who are new to a workplace, I feel like face-to-face is really the best way to go. Like I saw that question, and for me, in my stage, I'm fine, because I understand what to do. I don't love socializing and networking, but it's the best way to do it. And I know how to do it on video. But people will take my calls, right? If you're new, you can't walk into, you can't do a water cooler moment over Zoom. We can always advise people to do that, but I don't really know if it really works, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy Harvey. Jennifer Tajeda, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. So I agree with Nancy. It's very important for us to understand that this is an individual experience. What I need may be different from what Nancy needs, what Elliot needs, what you need, Professor. So I think we are at a pivotal point because I think a lot of organizations, this is when they are beginning their office, their office and workplace reopenings, and it's going to be really important. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about, since I personally will be going back into the office next week, and I am in a new organization and I'll have an opportunity to meet people in person for the first time, essentially, is that organizations have to be very mindful of the fact that the individuals that walked out of their workplace in March of 2020 are different from the individuals that are coming into the workplace. And I think everybody has to be very mindful of that. I think in terms of equity within organizations, also being mindful of when we have policies that are open to interpretation by different managers, what does that mean? So you may have a very different experience working under one manager than another. So being very mindful and tracking things. I think metrics will be really important. Within organizations, you have different demographics. You can be perhaps looking at parents or caregivers, who's coming into the office when you're given a choice, if you're given a choice, because that is a privilege, and not everybody will have an opportunity to be in a remote or hybrid workplace. Who are the people that are coming into the office? I think it's going to be very important for us to also track as we kind of go into this new phase. Does FaceTime mean that you are more likely to be promoted? Like, how important is FaceTime? For an organization like Fried Frank, where I work, we have offices in the United States, in New York and DC, and we have offices in Europe. And one of the things that I've seen, which I think is great, is that there's been a greater integration. We are all the same tile on one of our WebEx calls. Now, when we're going into this hybrid model, the technology, so, making sure that we even understand what the technology options are, so that we give everybody an opportunity to contribute to meetings fully. So what does that mean? So I think we're going to have to just be very mindful. I think this offers great opportunities. I think, again, just being that some people work better from home and others in the office, we'll have an opportunity to see, how things go. But I think this is a very important time. Another thing that, we can have a conversation on is this idea of the Great Resignation. A lot of individuals are new to their organizations. They've joined organizations during the pandemic. So again, there's just been a reshuffling. One of the things that I find very interesting in the work that we do is that I think employees are now more aware of, they have a say in how they want to feel within organizations. And I think we've seen employees speaking up more, which I think is fabulous. So very mindful. And I think, again, this is a pivotal time for all organizations and for us to all remember to operate from a place of empathy. We're all going, everybody's dealing with something and just, being mindful of the individual experience now that people are returning to the workplace.
Thank you, Jennifer. Tajeda. It's interesting, you said mindful and Nancy Harvey said listening. And it's interesting that these terms keep coming up now after we've all experienced so much in this global crisis that we're facing. And last on this question is Elliot Dawes.
I think I got through 2 of my 4 college sub goals before my 5 minutes were up. So I'm going to return to number 3, and number 3 is to strengthen college-wide faculty diversity hiring and retention policies and practices. And I think that that's very important in terms of thinking about equity, because institutions must be committed to implementing equitable practices. And sometimes they're very specific things that we should be doing that maybe we haven't been doing before. So in terms of strengthening college-wide faculty diversity or administrator diversity or, diversity at the college generally, what are some practical things that we can do to engage in equitable practices? One of the things that we've been looking at is making sure that all of our position announcements are published in diverse publications. And maybe that wasn't something that we were doing before. Do our job ads appear in the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education? Do they appear in the Hispanic Outlook in Higher Education? Do they appear in Prospanica? Do they appear in Tribal College, the Journal of American Indian Higher Education, right? These, sometimes we sort of limit ourselves and have our position announcements only appearing in mainstream publications, like let's say the Chronicle of Higher Education, and then we wonder why we don't have diverse applicant pools, right? So being intentional about the practices that we engage in, whether or not they are practices that promote equity, I think that that's something concrete that we should really be looking at. What are the strategies that we're engaging in? And if they're not yielding the results that we want, like diverse applicant pools, maybe we should be adjusting things a little bit and tapping into other resources that will help us to diversify those applicant pools. So at our college right now, we're having conversations about that, about making sure that all of our position announcements are published widely so that many people out in diverse communities will be able to see these position announcements and will be encouraged to apply for either faculty or administrative positions at Baruch College.
If I could add something,
Sure.
Elliot and Jennifer and Shelly. Equity touches on everything, right? To your point, the recruiting, once we get people in the pipeline, you get applicants. Who's looking at the applications or who's doing the interviewing? We've touched on mitigating bias in performance evaluations and getting diverse perspectives and looking at, I talk about things like making blind resume, blind applications, things like that. But it's really key in identifying places where in the process where bias shows up and is a huge challenge. And it's for promotions, you're attracting people, and when you come through the door, what's happening, right? Are you being equally or equitably considered, right? For mentoring, for participation in professional development, for succession pipelines even. And in the college scenario, it's pretty much the same, right? And it's talking about how do we reprogram, or how do we get folks to understand what bias looks like, that we all have it? What are we saying that we're looking for? And are we changing it depending on who's sitting in front of you?
That's great. Thank you, Nancy Harvey. This is going to be a very lively conversation. The chat is filling up with all kinds of questions about programs and resistances to DEI in corporate spaces and workplaces, questions about Black students' recruitment and retention and support at Baruch. There's all kinds of questions in that chat. And if you have questions, please add your questions to this chat. And before we get into a more open conversation with everyone and addressing some of these questions, I'll invite you again one more time to take a look at this poll. And we will, if Alexandria Jackson could share the poll one last time, it takes about 30 seconds. You just click your links and then be sure to click the submit button. And then submit. And then if everyone does that, we can see the results. How about that? And then maybe that might spark some more questions and conversation. Alexandria?
Yes, so I'll just end the poll here. So just one thing about our polls here on Zoom. So the questions, it kind of doesn't save that data. So even if you filled out the poll at the beginning of the event, if you can just go ahead and answer those 4 questions just really quickly so we can just get a fuller conversation. And we'll just one more minute here for our poll results.
Great, thank you. And it's going to be, it's a very interesting thing. This is one of the challenges we have even about equity when we're teaching remotely at Baruch. Very often we use those polls because so many students are quiet, right? They're on the mute button and we're just looking at a black screen, a box with a name. And polls are a great way to get everyone to engage. And it's a great way for us to see the sort of distribution of attentions when we ask just a quick sample of questions. So Alexandria, could you share that poll, the results? Awesome. So 70% of the people prefer to work remotely. 63% of people believe that they have the same career opportunities for advancement. That's interesting. The third question, 85% of the people responded to say that they believe that remote or hybrid work options are a question of equity and inclusion. And finally, 74% of the participants have had one or more professors of color while studying at Baruch. That's incredible to me. That last one is incredible to me because I will say that at the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences in Baruch, there are only 3 Black professors who are full. That's the highest rank, which means those 3 are the only ones who have the credentials or the rank to serve as deans, provosts, presidents, gatekeepers. And so it's really lovely that people had Black faculty at Baruch, and I wonder what their rank was. I wonder if they were part-time adjunct workers or if they were full-time tenure track, which is a huge equity, a disparity in equity at Baruch. So thank you for filling the poll and thank you for your questions. And we are going to pass the conversation, this Q&A discussion with our panelists to Alumni Relations, our colleague in Alumni Relations. I'm looking at her in the corner of my screen, Alexandria Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelly. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing such great insights so far tonight. And, going back to that discussion that started in the chat, how can Baruch College not only enroll more Black students, but how can we see those Black students making it towards obtaining their 4-year degree? And I guess we'll start with Elliot, and then maybe we'll go around the table just to hear everyone's suggestion.
Sure. Well, I have a great deal of experience working at the City University of New York. I was at John Jay College. I was the University Director of the CUNY Black Male Initiative Program. So one of the great things about being part of a large public university is something that Ms. Tajeda was talking about previously, this idea of pipelines, pipelining students from the vast talents that are available in the various public high schools generally throughout the city of New York. But Baruch College is also part of this network of a university that has these wonderful community colleges that are very diverse in their student bodies, right? So I'm very encouraged by that I think that might be something that we really should focus on going forward, creating pipelines, certainly from New York City high schools, but creating pipelines from community colleges into the senior colleges at the various CUNY institutions, in particular Baruch College. Recently, the dean of the Zicklin School, as well as the associate deans, who happen to be people of color, have created a Baruch College Academy that is a pipeline program into Zicklin from BMCC, the Borough of Manhattan Community College. And I think that there are efforts to expand that in the future from LaGuardia Community College as well as Hostos Community College, LaGuardia in Queens, Hostos in the Bronx, BMCC in downtown Manhattan. So I think that encouraging efforts like that to create pipelines for community college students to make their way into Baruch College is very important, and I see that initial investments are being made in those pipeline programs that builds on work that's been done at Baruch College previously. And I'm not sure we have time to get into that, but if anyone asks, we're able to talk a little bit about that now. But now going forward with these pipeline efforts, there's a group of students in the first cohort coming from BMCC. There has to be a intentional focus on making sure that those students receive the support that they need, that they feel that they're part of a community, and that we recognize that as an institution that we have a duty and obligation to retain those students and support them in their persistence through the Baruch College experience, and in my opinion, then into graduate and professional school. Like we should be, as soon as someone comes to Baruch, we should be sort of having them think about taking the GRE, taking the GMATs, and preparing for MBAs, preparing for law school, preparing for doctoral programs. So I think that that's the type of consciousness that is supporting this Baruch College Academy. That's a partnership between BMCC and Baruch College. And I'd like to see more of that. I think that needs to be expanded over time.
Sorry, Shelly, would you have any insight, would you have any insight into that question?
Yeah, I would say that we're losing, the support is the will is there, right? What Elliot Dawes is describing, the will to support students and to ensure that they graduate in a timely fashion and that they have the support that they need to be able to design the future that they're pursuing is absolutely there. But what I can see in my role as a teacher at Baruch and as a leader of a department, Black and Latinx, Black and Latino studies, is that the numbers are not very good, right? We have students, they enroll, pandemic happens, the first group of students that will not return are Black and Latino students for all kinds of reasons. We have students that, sometimes it just takes longer to graduate. This whole expectation of 4 years of college is not realistic for anyone in the United States. And this myth that people finish school in 4 years is only a myth. We need to talk about the ways that, students, Black and Latino students in particular, can find access to and feel included in their aspirations with, the various services that the college provides. That said, that there has been a shift in that commitment, partly because the leadership has changed, because we have a president who's committed, and we have folks like Elliot Dawes in place. So time will tell. That's my quick answer.
Thank you. And for our next question, how are organizations evaluating the effectiveness of their DEI strategies? Maybe we could start with Nancy Harvey with that question.
So thank you. That is so key, right? Everyone's sprouting aspirations, making commitments, donating funds even, and I'm a governmental authority. So we invest in our community, but we don't have $1 million check to cut to somebody, right? To an organization. And if we're really serious about this, then it's a matter of identifying metrics that work. You have to evaluate the program, which is we're pretty confident that we put together an informed strategy and commitments that fit our culture and our company and our industry, right? And then our trustees, the board of trustees, want to know, because we started reporting into the board of trustees, and that was a new level for me, right? And when you make the commitment and you get the support, now you have to talk about the long journey. And it's not pretty to start to look at how you're going to measure success. For us, our aspirations is to just grow representation, right? And increase equity across our business processes. So we couldn't do things like, oh, we're gonna hire, in the next 2 years, we'll have 50% more increase in women. That would be brilliant. But for us, we are mid-sized and we are low hire, low churn. So that's not applicable or relatable, or even that aspiration, or that this doesn't make sense for us. So for us, it's about behaviors, right? And commitment to change. So we identified metrics like looking at our succession pipeline. What's the representation there? We're going to look at our overall representation. We want to look at things like promotions, who's in the mentorship programs. So now we're starting to ensure that representation is more proportional to the folks who are onboarded. But when we do get people in the pipeline, which is one other thing that we're looking at, candidate, not just hires, but measuring offers. And we'll continue to track that and release that information to the board and talk about it with the organization, so that we know, are we going backwards? Are we stagnant? And then we continue to look at what other programs we can launch, right? In order to continue to grow representation in the company and start to see movement by 2030. We want to see it before, but it is a long journey. And we just need leadership and our employee base to work together and have difficult conversations around things that may or may not be working, and looking at new things. We also do get engagement surveys because we want to know what's happening and how people are feeling, right? So ours is every other year, and it's considered to be upward feedback, and that will help us looking at it from an intersectional perspective on the results. So you can see who's feeling engaged and how they're feeling, and what else we can do to improve the employee experience. Because we could be doing all these things and people are like, well, we don't feel like we're being included or we belong, which is an indicator that something else has to be done or implemented.
Thank you for that. Jennifer, could you share just what your organization is doing to measure your DEI efforts?
Absolutely. So similar to what Nancy mentioned, we really look at metrics, and we have national benchmarks that we're always looking at, and we're assessing ourselves against those benchmarks. But one of the things that I think is also really important to know is that for law firms, our summer associateship programs are really important. So if we are seeing an increase in demographic representation, that's really big for us, because I also think where you have New York City, for example, with so many law firms, and what is differentiating your law firm from the next law firm is the company culture. If you can get more people from a particular school to want to join your organization, that speaks volumes. So we also have periodic engagement surveys. I also think that organizations, including ours, did a lot of listening sessions in 2020, and important to continue to have that. But I think ultimately what's important to know as well is that organizations have to create, which is again very difficult to assess whether or not you've created one, but a safe space. We know that sometimes individuals don't feel comfortable even replying to surveys, even if we tell them that they are anonymous. So if you're creating a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, attending your listening sessions, responding to your engagement surveys, then it's really important to have a post and do it often so that you have an understanding of what people are thinking. Because ultimately you can have a strategy, but if people do not feel a change personally, they won't, from their perspective, they don't think your strategy is working. So very mindful. There's a lot of people that work obviously within all organization, and they have unique perspectives to assessing the effectiveness of the organization's DEI strategy, but those are just some of the things that we use at our firm, and I know most, if not all, organizations are also doing to measure the effectiveness of the strategy.
Thank you. Our next question, what resources would you suggest looking into to create an effective DEI strategy? So let's, just go around the table. Let's start with Elliot for this question.
Sure. Well, in the higher education context, I think that there's been a lot written on promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. There's one scholar practitioner, Dr. Damon Williams, who has written 2 books on the role of chief diversity officers in U.S. colleges and universities. So I would recommend his work. That's 2 great volumes for thinking about how to implement DEI strategies within the context of higher education. There are also many diversity, equity, and inclusion journals. There's Insight magazine, which focuses on promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. There's Diverse Issues in Higher Education, which is another place where we're starting to put our Baruch College position announcements to make sure that our jobs are being seen by, people who read a journal that is dedicated to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. We certainly want to reach readers like that. So I just find like there are a lot of resources like that. There are more practical resources also, like I'm a member of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, and I think that that's another important resource in this space. I don't think that it's good for a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional to think of themselves as being isolated. I think it's really important to reach out and create a network of people who are doing this type of work in other higher education settings at other colleges and universities. I think it's really important to share ideas and information with people who are promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in other sectors, which is why we'll be keeping in contact with Ms. Harvey and Ms. Tajeda in terms of sort of thinking about how can we, apply some of these strategies from the corporate or, public sector context in higher education. So there are a lot of resources that I think are available, but I've found that it's been very helpful to sort of listen to the work that's being done by colleagues at other colleges and universities and thinking about applying some of those strategies here at Baruch College or some previous institutions that I've been affiliated with.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add any other resources that they found helpful?
I'll just say there's I find that there's a lot of information about DEI, whether you're reading Gartner or McKinsey, or I don't even want to go there and talk about them. If you go on LinkedIn, there are all these practitioners on there who are very open. You need only ping them, and folks are open to talking to you about where you're at, right? Because I just want to start by saying every company is not this huge corporation that can just from the top down say, oh, we're going with DEI today, and here is a budget, right? And staff. So if you go on there and try to find people who are in similarly located positions or your industry, and those who are very experienced, and continue to listen, and you will get guidance on how to move forward. And if you're just starting, then you're talking about awareness. Because I realize that diversity, equity, and inclusion, people tend to think it's just hire women and Black people, right? Even now. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is far more than that. It's for everyone. It's not just an HR issue. It is an issue like like the panelist said, it's from the trustees all the way down to members of employee resource groups. So just be encouraged and reach out.
So is it important that DEI leaders be people of color? And is it important that they have a law background? What is?
I guess I can start. I'm not a lawyer. So you do not need to be a lawyer to do this work. And I really think that, again, I mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but allyship is really important. So if you are passionate about this topic and dedicated to creating equitable workplaces, this is a great profession for you. Sort of how I got started professionally in this work, prior to joining Fried Frank, I was at the Port Authority, and I've always been interested in this work. So I joined the leadership team of one of the ERGs there and sort of got introduced to the work professionally, then transitioned to a role in HR. And then ultimately my goal was always working for the diversity and inclusion office, and I did that. So there are different ways that you end up working in the fields, but again, I think passion and dedication and understanding, again, that change is slow. Unfortunately, I wish I had a wand and can make everything better. You have to be, dedicated, because there's a long road ahead for all of us. And I think even now, going on 2 years of this pandemic and everything that happened since the summer of 2020, one of the fears that we have as DI practitioners is that we're going to lose momentum. So we want to do a lot so we can make sure that people don't forget and that this stays top of mind for everyone. So hope that answers the question, but I ultimately wanted to say that, no, you do not need a law degree to do this work.
I think that there are many people of color who are attracted to the profession, who are attracted to being diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals. And I think that that's because the context matters. I think that we have to be honest about the fact that we live in a nation that has a long and pronounced history of exclusion, right? Exclusion of people from marginalized groups, exclusion of people of color. And it's been a long, protracted struggle to create a multiracial, multicultural, participatory democracy, right? So I find that people who have been excluded from participating in those structures are often deeply committed to this idea of inclusion, right? So I think that that might be a reason why we see people of color overrepresented as diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, because I think that there are people who are deeply committed to sort of pushing us beyond where we've been and really focusing on inclusion. And by focusing on inclusion, there needs to be a recognition and an understanding of the long pronounced history of exclusion of certain people.
I do think it's helpful like you said, Professor, but what happens is you're an activist. I want to say we're always having to be activists on our own behalf, right? Because we're excluded and we're used to being stereotyped and treated less than. So there is that space that where you start at, and then folks seem to think only people of color. This is a black and white issue, and we only need people of color to address DEI. We're the only ones who can handle this, and we're equipped enough to deal with the trauma and deal with everything and lead. All of this is true, but you do also need to understand how HR works, because equity touches on the entire employee life cycle and student cycle, right? Your experience in the workplace. So whereas we may start because we join an ERG, we're in a company where we're the only, and who else is going to advocate for us and stand up, right? We're going to do it. And it may actually lead you to a path of this is what I want to do, and I really have the energy and I want to stay here. But then you have to grow the tools to be able to strategically ally yourself with leadership and with everybody else to move that needle and keep it moving, because you want to grow representation in the company and you want to see us reflected across all levels of leadership. So I don't want to walk into a company and see, oh, there's that one lone person of color who is the DEI manager, and then everybody else is something else, right? So it's not an easy fix, right? And it's who's going to do it? Am I gonna go do what I want to do and be some superstar scientist and leave the DEI work to somebody else? But you need a DEI specialist, because if you're gonna become a superstar scientist, you need to be able to help folks to broaden their perspective and understand what it means to be equitable and inclusive. So when you walk through the door, you feel like you're gonna be there, right? But you do want to feel like you're part of a community and you're respected and you're valued, and you can contribute and you can achieve your professional dreams in this space, and then look to help others to come in, right? Work with the students who need help, right? Mentor somebody else who may not be understanding how to come in the workplace and deal with some of the microaggressions that you face and the different issues that show up in a company. So it's something that you have to think carefully about. I do think all leaders now understand that understanding what DEI is and having a deep commitment to DEI, because it grows your empathy and your ability to lead. Because I feel like this is a competency that's very critical to leadership going forward. As you said, the great resignation is happening. It's happening because companies tend to think that your experience and how you show up in the workplace and the benefits that you get. At first it was, you better come because we are offering all of this. And now the viewpoint has changed from the pandemic, from having to be home to having to all of a sudden make a choice about what your values are. Is it better to commute 2 hours a day? I used to do it. And I totally get that your quality of life is changing as you do this, and people are looking at it much differently. So that competency to be able to empathize and understand the importance of equity and the importance of attracting people of color. And when we walk through the door, I want to see myself at the top. I want to see somebody else sitting there. Otherwise, I'm not going to stay, because the message is, you're only going to make it to mid-level, and that's it.
Thank you for that. So do you have suggestions on how to create excitement and dialogue in your organization around DEI and in enacting a DEI practice?
I like to start with, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm just saying one more thing and then I'm gonna shut up.
Please go ahead.
Excitement is great. I think courageous conversations, so that you're not just having superficial food, fun, and I forget what the third F is what we talk about with our employee resource groups. That's great. Cultural competency, excellent. But growing, getting your company to be more mature and courageous in talking about what's happening Again, that helps you to, you know, when I forget what happened on my team, it might have been the George Floyd murder that Friday. We couldn't talk, but people are still calling us to say, we're supposed to have a meeting. Or like, are you watching CNN? We can't talk. Please don't call me. We'll have to reschedule. We need a minute, right? And being able to be fearless, understanding that when you have these conversations, though, you have to be prepared to act. Like, people are going to tell you things and you can't just have it go into the atmosphere and that's that. You cried, you said, oh, I feel so bad for you, and then it's done. You actually have to be prepared to take action, some kind of action that's necessary to address some of what may surface. But I think having a courageous conversation helps to improve people wanting to join the discussion. And you don't have to say it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. You could just invite people to have a conversation about what's going on in the culture, right? The anti-Asian hate, the crime, anything that's happening that's impacting the community and the employees that are in your community. So it is excitement, but it's a different kind of excitement. Excitement kind of implies just like World Heritage Day, for instance, at night, but we love food here, many cultures, and it is a great event. And I'm like, that's one of my favorite events. We're not doing it, but we're also going to have all these other discussions, the issues that are facing parents, right? When the women who were taking care of kids while we were home, were working even harder while we were home, things like that. And I would encourage and say it's excitement because you want to learn about what your neighbor is going through and how you can empathize, and call it engagement, and add some other descriptors to it to encourage people to come out and participate. And I wouldn't worry about, like, I think I used to get attached to, if 50 people didn't show up, it wasn't a success. You need to release that. If 10 people show up and they're moved and they want to invite somebody else the next week, I think that's progress, and that should be looked at as and regarded as success. And thank you very much for listening to me. I'm done.
Thank you, Nancy. Just a few more questions before we wrap up. So with white supremacy more overt over the last 6 years, diversity fatigue seems to have given way to diversity backlash. What are you seeing in terms of resistance to diversity efforts, and how are you dealing with it?
Well, I think just looking at it over the course of, I was going to mention, maybe engaging history is one way of encouraging incitement, or not incitement, excitement around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. But when I think about the nation's history, I think about progress and retrenchment, right? That there are sort of waves and cycles from the Reconstruction period down to the present. There's progress and there's retrenchment, right? So when I think about the second Reconstruction or the Civil Rights era, I think of a period of enormous progress. And maybe right now we're going through a period of retrenchment, right? But there's still the possibility of change going forward, right? So I think that when you sort of look at it that way, you can be optimistic about the work that we're doing, like the current challenge around issues of critical race theory, I think is very popular in the media right now. But I think that after we deal with sort of like the hot button issues or a hot button kind of perspective on critical race theory, what's going to happen is we're going to have a greater degree of understanding of this movement that took place in American law schools in the 70s and 80s that really required us to look more critically at what's happening in terms of the society, in terms of race and opportunity, or will cause us to think deeply about the nation's racial history and how we're still struggling with vestiges of that history today. So I I feel like there's like a bit of pessimism in the way that the question is asked, and I find that right now maybe that pessimism is justified, but when you sort of look at the long haul of it, there's been tremendous progress that's been made, and right now we might be experiencing a period of retrenchment, but that's not going to last forever.
I just wanted to just jump in real quick because I am a critical race theorist, and Black and Latino studies is critical race theory. And while there is, this moment of education and conversation in certain circles, we also need to really pay attention to what's happening on the larger scale, right? So, for instance, the current lieutenant governor of the state of Texas, who's running on re-election, is looking to remove tenure from all faculty inside of the University of Texas system who are teaching what he calls critical race theory, which is in fact Black studies and Latino studies. In the state of Arizona, it's illegal to teach children Mexican American history, Chicano history. It's currently not part of the public education program. It is forbidden. In many, many states, authors as innocuous as Toni Morrison are banned. What does that mean in the long term? It means just like in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was getting education and made it so that we now have all of these idiots in Congress, right, who think that they are educated because they were miseducated, undereducated, improperly educated in the 80s, are now in leadership positions and setting policy. And so while we are dealing with all kinds of hardships about equity, diversity, inclusion, it's really important to understand that this is a very long race and that much of what we're dealing with has been a plan had in action since Ronald Reagan and before. And that right now we are facing a crisis that a whole bunch of Chicano children in states that belong to Mexico, right, can't even talk about their culture or their history. They cannot study it. So when they grow up, they won't even have a language to talk about these things. And so when they become policemen or when they become teachers or when they become whatever they become, they will not have the skills. They will not have the knowledge. They will not have the history. In New York, we feel like we're somehow protected because this is a blue state. And we're lucky at Baruch and at CUNY that we have executive leadership that is not holding back and is not threatening our tenure and is not threatening the text that we teach. But we're not in a vacuum. What happens when Texas, one of the largest states in the nation, is banning books, firing faculty, and teaching Holocaust denial while they're teaching, in under the guise of balanced education? So I am an eternal optimist. I believe in optimism. I am passionate, just like our fantastic panelists are passionate. But I do think it's really important that every person in this room, with whatever you're doing, is read those books that are banned. Don't move to Texas if they're going to keep practicing this. Don't spend your money on vacation there, and really take a stand. And we can't pretend to be, objective or neutral right now because our lives depend on it. I'm sorry, I just got worked up because this is why I'm still here. Like, I've been working since 8 o'clock this morning, and we have to do this work. We have to show up every time, and we have to explain to every person who doesn't understand why diversity, equity, inclusion is absolutely critical to our, not just our survival, but our thriving and our future. I'm done. Sorry, I didn't mean to co-opt. Alexandria, I texted her, is like, can I say something? But it's important because it affects everything we do. It affects how our children will grow up. It affects who our police will be, who our legislatures are, etc. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you for that, Shelly. Thank you. And for one of our last questions, so we know that we need more leaders of color at these organizations, but how do we ensure that people of color have power, authentic power in their positions, and we are not tokenizing our colleagues or even students at Baruch in our ongoing DEI efforts?
Well, I think that anything that we can do within our context to make sure that people from underrepresented populations don't feel isolated in those contexts, I think is very important. So we mentioned sort of like affinity groups within law firms or within some of these organizations. I think that that's very crucial and important. That if you want to make sure that people feel comfortable in a sense of belonging in an institution, then you have to put policies and practices in place to make sure that people are not tokens, right? That you have a critical mass of people from various populations who are at the institution. In terms of the way that diversity, equity, and inclusion may impact an area that maybe we're not thinking about, like facilities. Recently, our office received complaints and concerns from a group of students about structures at the college. Do we have gender neutral bathrooms? Do we have all gender bathrooms, right? So there's a critical mass of students who may self-identify as gender fluid or as transgender students who are making these demands, right? I think that if a person has to sort of make a demand like that in isolation, it's very, very difficult to do. But when you have a critical mass of people who can sort of raise their voices collectively and make an argument about what's right in terms of inclusion, then it's much easier, right? So I think that from an enrollment management perspective, from a perspective of people in human resources, thinking about those critical mass issues are important. That you want to create an institution where someone comes in and they don't feel alone, right? Like they're seeing maybe a fully integrated institution from top to bottom in a variety of different ways. But I think that if people are made to feel as if they're tokens at an institution, then maybe the people at the institution have set it up to be that way by really having people, I'm one of, 25 in my department, right? That weighs on individuals, right? And you can't make an argument that a person shouldn't feel like a token when they're one of, 25 or 50 people in their department. I remember I worked for a very large law firm that had a huge litigation department, and I was one of two Black lawyers in the litigation department that was like 150 people. And it weighed on you coming in there every day and being sort of one of very few people from this underrepresented population, right? So I think that the easiest way to sort of deal with these issues of tokenism is just make sure that you have an institutional commitment to make sure that you're not making anyone from any particular population feel like a token when they're coming into the institution.
I think, let me add, I totally agree with that assessment. And I think so there's psychological safety, right? Why did you hire this person? If you're gonna recruit again and then have them come in and feel like this is about tokenism as opposed to value and value added, that's an issue. And if you are an organization, let's just say, because it happens every day, you might be an organization that is not diverse and you're trying to become diverse, and it's a challenge. So then the next thing to do is to line up allies, right? Make it, have the expectation, set it up from leadership downwards that, this person has the full support and respect of leadership and has a sponsor or a mentor, somebody. When we're talking about even women in the workplace and sexism and just disregarding what we say if we're the only, because that happens too, whereas if you're a woman of color, being able to support and back up. So that happens, and you need to have some champions in the room who will say that was a great idea, and didn't you just say that? And didn't you say that last week? Why is that great today? Something like that, you know? But it is a challenge, and that's one of the things that's going to determine how well you're able to retain and grow the staff that you're able to attract. And again, we're saying we're trying to attract the best. We're not looking at scraping at the bottom of the barrel. We're not at the bottom of the barrel, right? We were going to Baruch, we're graduating and have our degrees, and God knows mine was a commitment to get it done. Because I had just come here to this country. And so I earned it. And you don't get to look at me sideways because I earned my degree and made it into the company at the table. So it's a holistic approach. You can't just say, well, I want to diversify and I'm gonna go balls to the walls to attract employees of color. And that's your DEI program right there. You come in and right away the microaggressions start, because let's face it, you are going to be asked, are you delivering the food? You know, can you take my number? Are you the junior person taking notes? Things like that. I mean, that happened to me, right? Somebody's like, well, he's an attorney. And I was just like, excuse me. And my colleague he's very present. He's like, I don't know why people still do that to this day. Look at the white guy in the room and decide that, you know, he's the voice of reason or the voice of the senior person. So it's why DEI is a long journey and a long haul. It really is. And you have to keep your wits about it, because I do believe that if you make it that far, it would be, you know, it would be sad to like explode and punch somebody around that, then lose the momentum or lose your strength and your power by giving it away. But it does happen.
Thank you. And with that concludes our audience questions for the evening. I just want to thank our panelists, Nancy Harvey, Jennifer Tajeda, and Elliot Dawes for joining us this evening. And I will give it to my coworker to wrap us up for the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you. This was such a fruitful and great conversation. I feel like we need to have part 2. Thank you all again, like Alexandra said, Jennifer Tajeda, Elliot Dawes, Nancy Harvey, moderator, Shelly, Everson. Thank you all. And to our guests and alumni that have joined us, thank you for your questions. Thank you for being present for this conversation. This was recorded, and when you receive the thank you email, the recording will be in it as well, the link. Please be sure to share it and listen to it again. Like I said, I do believe there's going to be a part 2 down the road, and I look forward to it. And certainly last but not least, my coworker, Alexandra Jackson. I couldn't do what I do without you. So thank you once again. And everybody, have a great night. And remember, DEI is for everyone. Take care, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.